Hello, it's Mel. Hello.
Hello,
Hi.
it's Tony.
Hi, it's Madeline.
Hi. Mel's here.
Hey, Madeline.
Hi, Tony. How's everyone doing today?
All good here. Beautiful day. Productive day so far.
Yeah. Yeah.
How about you,
here.
Madeline?
Same here. It's been busy and so far beautiful. Kind of a sunny day. A little bit questionable, whether it wants to rain. Skies can't make up their mind.
Madeline, have you seen the bottom screen where you can actually do the chats and everything? Have you and Mel walked through that?
No, I just got on. I was doing some updates on.
Mel, can you get in there real quick? And
Yep.
I'm not able to see the bottom of the screen. Is there some reason why?
Yeah, give me one second.
Yeah, let's get this going. So on the bottom, there'll be a chat box there. So sometimes people can chat you if they want to highlight something. And we can chat each other. You can do one person. You can do the whole group, right?
Okay.
So Mel will be monitoring chats coming in for questions, Q&As. You don't have to worry about that. But if there's something I want to tee you up or you want to tee me up, you can just chat it in there and there's a drop-down box for that as well.
Where is that? I don't. Oh, I see. Wait. Chat. I got it. I see it. Okay. So if I just wanted to test it. So there's a drop down. Nope, that doesn't do it. How do I?
Hold on.
Mel, are you on?
Yep.
I see everyone. Oh, I see where you can pick. Yep. Okay. I see Melissa, Adam. I don't see you, Tony.
Yeah, I don't know why I'm not showing up here. Something's weird.
Tony's hiding.
I'm not hiding. It's not activating my drop downs on the side.
Stephanie.
It's very weird what's going on here. I'm going to check out and sign back in and see what's going on. Let's see. There we go. All right.
All right. I am now going to be sharing my screen. You guys see that?
I do.
Yep.
All right.
Oh, there I see Tony. Okay.
I'm going to mute because I'm on the phone so it doesn't echo. And I'm going to give video up. There we go.
All right.
Adam, you want to get video on?
Do I?
Oh, sure. Hold on.
No, I don't.
Okay. Come on, Madeline. You're going to look a lot better than me. Go for it.
Not a good hair day, Tony.
Whatever makes you more comfortable.
Although I am in the office.
Yeah, people are always wondering whether I'm out by the beach or something,
Oh, so this is your evidence.
Yeah, that's true. One of these days I will I'll do some sort of video from the gazebo out on the ocean so they can envision what they think my life's like as opposed to the reality of it. Funny, I was just talking to one gentleman and he just took a new job and he's at a company where the leadership is really not, he's changing the whole brand of the tax function. So I told him, I said, this is one you can't miss. I'm going to send him this app. He's not a member of Symposia. He's already a chief tax officer, but he's wrestling with the, leadership that doesn't quite get it type of thing and how to get him there. So I'll send him a recording of this. I think it'll be very helpful for him. We usually give them a couple of minutes just to get more of the people. I know some of the people obviously couldn't make this. They're on vacation or they're on business trips, but I think we'll get a pretty good crowd. And everybody's looking forward to listening to it. So I think 100% will definitely tap into the recordings.
Okay.
What time do we got up there? Give them about 3 more minutes, Mel, and then we'll kick this off.
Sounds good.
Madeline, I was speaking with Eric the other day and Jim. They both said to say hi to you, by the way.
Oh, yes. Please send them both my regards. I haven't talked to Jim since he's taken the new role.
Yeah, he's up to his elbows. You know Jim.
I know Jim. Did he move yet? Has he?
Yeah.
He's moved his
whole
family
family's
and everything?
moved. Yeah, well, the older daughter went to college, so they sent her off away, and then his younger daughter is a sophomore going into her junior year. She's got 2 more years left.
Right.
So yeah, they're all settled in finally.
He's down in Virginia, right?
Arlington down in Roslyn, right outside of Arlington.
Roslyn.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
All right, Mel. Let's get this launched.
Sounds good. All right. Tony, you will be introducing Madeline for us today.
Yep. Please move the slide down if you would.
Okie dokies.
Okay, so I'm not going to read Madeline's background. I'll give you a couple of quick stories. I asked Madeline to do this on branding because I've known her and knew of her for many, many years. I won't say how many because she'll get mad at me when it comes to the age issue, but I will tell all of you that no person in my career, in 35 years of doing this, have ever gotten more companies to tell me not to recruit somebody out of a public accounting firm. When Madeline was at Arthur Andersen up in the tri-state area of Philadelphia, when I was recruiting and I asked for recommendations and suggestions of who the best young, dynamic, international tax senior managers there were, I can't tell you how many times Madeline's name came up, but right behind it was the story of, but whatever you do, do not recruit her out of Arthur Andersen. She's too valuable on our account. So that was my first experiences with her. So I never really got to work with her when she was young. Later on, we had an opportunity when I was working with John Evard in building the Tyco tax function, rebuilding it from the ground floor up when they moved it to New Jersey, to approach Madeline at the time. And at that point, she had moved to KPMG, was an international tax partner there, had, again, got the same accolades from everybody. But luckily, she was a little more open to talking to me about this opportunity, and I was able to bring her into Tyco. So besides building a personal brand, like amazingly, extremely impressive at that level, I can't have too many people tell me about how great she is, but then tell me don't recruit her. I then watched her build the brand within the department itself as we rebuilt the complete brand. She was an integral part of that, one of the top 3 people we hired at the beginning of the rebuild. And Eric Green, who you guys got to hear him talk a couple of sessions ago, Eric was one of the other people in that group there that we brought in initially. And there we had to build the brand of a department where tax had almost destroyed this company. And now we were going to try to make it at the forefront of everything that was going on. It was an inverted structure. They had to really gain the confidence and trust of the internal people, obviously gain the trust of the advisors, and clearly the governance issues at the federal and state area were there to be challenged as well. So I picked Madeline because of those reasons, and I couldn't pick a better person, I think, in my opinion. Let's move this on, if you can, Mel. All right, I'm going to turn it over to you, Madeline.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you so much for your very kind words. Today as we talk about branding, it's not necessarily something that maybe most of us tax professionals really think about, but the reality is each of us we do each have a brand, and we come to realize, and hopefully early in our careers realize, that our personal brand really does play a role in how we develop and ultimately will dictate the path that we take as tax professionals. How do you develop a brand? Well, sometimes I'd like to think about it in this way. We think about reputation, and sometimes the word reputation gets used in place or synonymously with brand or branding. But I think reputation is something that you get, as opposed to a brand, which is something that you can control, you can develop. You can also control your reputation, but I tend to think about branding when it comes to our careers and how we develop professionally as something that is truly within each of our control and is really our most valuable and tangible asset. As tax professionals, as executives, finance executives, members of the finance teams, we generally have to develop and will continually develop around the following 4 attributes that are listed on the slide. We know we have to develop our technical expertise. Without that, then we really can't qualify as tax professionals to begin with. We also have to develop operational effectiveness and business acumen. How well we know the business, how well we understand the industry trends, the macroeconomics, microeconomics, our business acumen, our learning agility in order to understand the business and be able to pivot with the business, and know how to build and manage relationships. But then ultimately, how we develop along each of those 4 attributes and how we incorporate those attributes into our everyday lives is really what will create our personal brand. And it's not a one-size-fits-all. And there are certain brands that will ultimately, or to a lesser extent or greater extent, work better with a certain type of organization, depending on the timing, the maturity of that company or that organization, the particular facts and circumstances surrounding the company at that time. So as an example, and Tony mentioned, I was recruited to join Tyco in the very early stages of what we refer to as the rebuild. We all, those of us who joined Tyco back in 2002, 2003 timeframe, when the then head of tax, John Ivard, had come on board, we were all aware that this was the $40 billion startup. We had to start fresh. We were all new. And we wasn't only the tax department that was new, all of the corporate functions were hired in and brought in to help save the company and ultimately to rebuild it and clean up, in effect, what had happened and what had occurred. And as Tony mentioned, in terms of branding, you probably couldn't have a more detrimental or negative brand at the time that the company had, both internally to a large extent and externally. Internally, because the underlying businesses were very sound. They were number 1 or number 2 in their markets. They were left unscathed as a result of the corporate issues that had occurred. And since everything was contained at corporate, it was the corporate brand and therefore the public brand, if you will, of the company that had been severely negatively impacted. And so each of us had to really start from scratch and work together and build our own brands and make ourselves known within the organization and how we were going to ultimately contribute to the future success of the company. So one of the key elements of that, as you think through and work through your career, is also how self-aware are you about your own brand and your own skill set, but also how self-aware is the organization and your ability to assess an organization's brand and how your brand would fit or perhaps not fit with the organization, particularly as you move up the ladder and move into either succession role or perhaps lateral roles, or in certain circumstances, another role outside of that organization, moving into another organization.
Hi, Madeline. I actually have a question here from one of our participants. The question is, as a new VP of tax, which attribute do you need to try to build the quickest in order to develop her personal brand within the tax in a timely manner?
I think the most important as a new VP in a new role is the ability to build and manage relationships. I think you wouldn't be in the role if you weren't already have the technical expertise. I think that's something that each of us builds quite early on, and I think it's certainly something that makes itself known very early, or certainly to a certain degree earlier in our careers. Operational effectiveness really depends on, the experience you have in driving results, and to some degree that too is something you develop sooner than later. And so when you're coming on board in a leadership role, and similar to what I recently have experienced joining CBRE from Tyco, one of the things that I think was the most valuable for me to try to quickly build and leverage was, how do I get to understand this company? How do I build my relationships, and both within my department and outside of tax within the corporate functions and the business, so that I can quickly execute on the things that mattered most, and certainly what the senior leadership and the board had hired me to do.
Okay. I do.
And I think there's should I take another question, or do you want to move to the next slide?
I actually do have, hold on one second here. They're just coming in so many, so I'm just trying to get the question here for you.
You're muted, Tony.
Okay. Are you trying to talk, Tony? Because you're on mute.
Okay, sorry for that. I apologize. Terry Wilson had chatted in a question on how much time should we expect it to take to develop a personal brand. Would you recommend using outside resources to help?
That's a great question. Time will, I think in some situations, timing can take, I guess I should say it may depend. It could depend on the circumstances and what you've already experienced. So I think it's important to recognize as soon as you can and as early as in your career the value of having a brand. Because if you don't, I think one could be created for you and you may end up losing some control, right? If you're not cognizant of what it is, first and foremost, you would like to do, what you want to achieve, and then how do you make that happen? How you make that happen, let's say in a professional services firm such as a Big Four, like when I first started in public accounting, was different. You wanted to make yourself known to certain managers and partners who were on certain accounts, and you wanted to ensure that you were someone that they wanted on their accounts, that you can be chargeable and efficient and you were developing technically, and you were getting the visibility in front of clients, so that as you progressed, you had the chance to take over, as a future manager, and then eventually as a partner as you begin to grow your book of business. In a corporate environment, I think the sooner that you can get and build those connections with your colleagues, and particularly cross-functionally. I can't tell you how many times and in my experience I've seen individuals who really don't get outside of their office, and they use and communicate only or solely through email when they're sitting right next door to someone. Those types of things, building that interaction on a daily basis with your colleagues, the cross-functional team members or teams that you may be on, and equally important, making your way through to understand the business. That all does take time, but unfortunately, you can't wait until you want to get to the next level, particularly a leadership role as either the head of tax or a number two, number one, because it may at that point be a little bit too late, and you may find yourself either stuck with a brand that's really inherited from the function, and that may be good or bad, or it may be that others have done a better job branding themselves to individuals who are either in senior roles or in management roles within the business or other functions or functional leaders, and that may or may not be serve as the best outcome. So just looking at some of that sort of ties into, I think, what's coming on the next couple of slides. I think it really goes back to being true to yourself. I think it's important to really understand what you're comfortable with. Being comfortable in your own skin is really first and foremost. If you're not the kind of person who is really comfortable getting out in front of an audience, let's say, and whether that be a management team meeting, a board meeting, audit committee meeting, but you're really a results-driven person. You're the person that if you somebody hands something to you, you get that done. Well, that's great. There are roles for everyone. So, remember, branding isn't about something that has to be directed or developed by virtue of solely what the company wants or you think the company wants you to be. It's most important, what is it that you want to be? How do you want your career to be structured? Where do you see yourself in 2, 3, 4, 5+ years? If you want to be a head of tax, well, then there's certain steps that you may need to take. If you don't want to be a head of tax, if you're happy in a certain role or within a certain group within the tax function, that's fantastic. Just understand what attributes you may need to develop to maintain that visibility and to further build that brand and to ensure that you can maintain your brand throughout the remainder of your career.
So I just wanted to add, since this group is all about people who, at least at this stage of their careers, have either decided they are currently in number one roles or they are absolutely committed to going to that number one role and running a tax function, Madeline's answer about which is the most important is the building and managing of relationships is essential. And you remember we had a session on this, internal, external relationships. That's the one to go back and review with this one combined. I think she's 100% correct. Assumptions on technical expertise is there. You got to be a good business person before you're, not just a tax technical person. So business acumen, knowledge of the organization is there, but this relationships aspect is there. And Madeline gave you a little tidbit a minute ago, in that you all have a brand, whether you know it or not. And Mark Lenadio just asked a question about what is Madeline's brand, and I'm going to let her address that. But I'm going to tell you, our job as executive recruiters is to find out in the market what each of your brands are and determine whether those brands are in alignment with our clients' needs and demands. So if I'm looking for somebody who's going to be a number 2 that's going to go into a number 1 role, I need people talking about this is somebody who has all of the attributes needed. Yes, they haven't had the exposure yet, but they are ready to go in and step into a number 1 role. And they'll develop in a couple of key areas they still need to work on, but all of the attributes are there and the drive and the desire is there. So you all have brands. The question is, Madeline said, how much are you controlling the brand? or is it just being established for you by others alone without your real direction? So I just wanted to highlight that component of it. Madeline, Mark's question is, what is your brand? I can tell you what I think your brand is, but what do you think your brand is?
Oh, gosh. Well, I believe my brand is that I am a high-performing, results-oriented leader, finance leader, who has extensive experience in leading transformational initiatives within a company. And I think also I do have the experience and have been fortunate in working with and developing my brand as someone who can effectively work with the business and particularly with management in helping them understand and in my ability to communicate effectively the intricacies and nuances of the tax world, particularly in a high-charged environment or in an environment that's undergoing change, to be effective and work with management in leading change and helping build and transform an organization. I know that my technical expertise is extremely sound and strong, but I also am aware that I am not the person that you call in a Washington national tax setting. I am, a very technical, very efficient tax executive. But first and foremost, I believe that my brand is that I'm also a business finance executive with an expertise in tax, but an expertise in the way that I've been able to work with the business, build relationships, and deliver results. Tony, does that mesh with yours?
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, I'm not recruiting Madeline to go and maintain an existing tax shop that's doing fine, and they just need somebody to kind of maintain it. I'm looking for her. She's a dead on. I'm looking at her brand to say, if somebody really wants to take something and elevate it, transformationally make changes, and they really want tax at the table in a strategic perspective, and they need leadership, all of those attributes fit right in on Madeline, and I can go to the bat and talk to a client about those skill sets and say, that's what you want, Madeline, somebody you need to speak to. And I can go to Madeline and say, look, it's not everybody can't do this role, but it might be very well suited for you and the things you really love to do. And they've got an appetite for that transformational change you're seeking to be part of. And that's how you put those two brands together, the brand of the company and what they really want tax to do, which is a whole other training session on how do you get a company to really clearly define what they really want to do versus the lip service they give, and then going to people with that brand that matches it. I think you were dead on. Terry or Mark, do either of you have any follow-up questions to this before we go on to the next slide, or anybody else have any other questions?
All right, I'll go ahead on to the next slide then.
So functional branding. So we've talked quite a bit about the personal brand. What about the tax function? How is really the first question? How is the tax function currently viewed? That's generally how I've approached it. What is the view of tax within the organization, just in general? Is tax, as Tony mentioned, is tax at the table, or is tax really relegated to a back office function that's really there to ensure compliance and reporting obligations are met, but is really not integrated with the business or even with the other functions? Same with how does senior management and the board and certainly the audit committee view tax? Are they considering tax strategically, or when they're making strategic decisions? Is the tax leader, head of tax, reporting on a regular basis to the audit committee in front of the board at least once a year? And then how is tax viewed within the finance organization itself and then by the other functions? Are they an active participant and a team player? And then does the business really understand the role of tax? Most cases that I've found, and particularly in my early career at Arthur Andersen and KPMG, to a large degree, the business, the operating side of the business really didn't know tax. And so, as I mentioned, it really depends on, first, what is the current state of play? A back office compliance shop, or a really a value-added function that is focused on increasing shareholder value and managing risk? Is tax really bureaucratic and inefficient, or are you on the front leading edge of being innovative and using technology to improve efficiencies? Ivory towered, technocrats, siloed, not good at playing in the sandbox. So all of these things, these are different types of brands that I've seen the tax function be, quote, labeled with, but I've also seen how the tax function's brand, the department's brand, can be developed based not only on what has occurred within the organization and the function itself, but by virtue of the personal brand of the leader and the personal brands of other key individuals, the number ones or number twos within the organization. So, as Tony mentioned, going back to the Tyco example, prior to John Evart taking over as the head of tax at Tyco, tax did not have a very good functional brand. There were different reasons for that, both internally and externally. Very technical, I think, was one of the words you would hear when it came to describing the old brand, if you will, before John Evart and the new team. But then over time, as we rebuilt the function, as we created our own personal brands within the organization and externally, then I think that we really did a complete reversal of that and became one of the most respected tax functions in the U.S. because of how well that John had built the team and how well we cohesed and built our personal brands together, with how the organization itself rebranded the company. I think there's a question. I'll just try to read it. And Melissa, can you read that question?
Yes, I can read that for you.
Thanks.
Okay, I have a question here from, the question is how do you get the tax team members to build on consensus around the brand and buy in to believe in ways consistent with the brand being developed?
I apologize. That's to behave in ways consistent with the brand being developed.
Oh, I'm sorry. Behave.
So that really does depend on what you're seeing as the behavior. So I think I'd say it could also depend on the circumstances in which you're in. So as an example, coming in as a new head of tax to a new organization, as opposed to, let's say, a succession situation where you succeed. So I've had the great fortune of having succeeded John Evart as the head of tax at Tyco, and so the building of the brand really had occurred in really all to John's credit. And so I felt it was my responsibility to maintain the integrity of that brand. And I certainly was quite fortunate to have my colleagues and my peers remain with me, taking on some other roles and working very closely with me in continuing to maintain and develop that brand that existed for the tax function, both within and outside of Tyco. And certainly we had some challenges because of some additional strategic initiatives that were then taking place within the company, such as the last spinoff that we did in 2012. And so that required some changes in how we were functioning as a team, but we certainly were very loyal and mindful of our brand and maintaining the brand as we built out the tax functions for the two new companies that we were creating. That's a different situation than what I encountered here at CBRE. So I was coming in as the new person. I was an outsider, not having grown up in CBRE. And so it was I had to play a different role in developing the brand, from scratch, because it was a situation where the company wanted to bring tax into the forefront. They knew how important tax was, and some of the changes that the company was undergoing really did require a change in, some functional areas such as tax. And so it was honestly a bit of a change, I think, for some folks to understand what it now meant and what we had to do as a team. In some cases, it did mean bringing on some additional resources and hiring at higher levels, direct reports to help me build the brand and help understand who very readily understood what we needed to do to create and develop a new brand. And so in that setting, it's a combination of having to identify those individuals who stand ready to help you, those who don't, and perhaps need to evaluate what they would like to do going forward. It perhaps may not be that they subscribe to your brand or to the future brand, and perhaps they recognize and are self-aware, as we noted in the first slide, that may not be something that they're capable of doing, or where their skills or their desires lie. And so it's sometimes better for them to perhaps look at other opportunities within the company, or perhaps look at other roles within the company to further their careers, while we look to rebuild and rebrand the tax function through other resources, external advisors, and new hires to continue that development.
I do have a question here from one of the participants. My company has more of a back office mentality when it comes to tax. Therefore, I see an uphill battle in positioning the tax department. Can you give me any tips on how to try to make a change that will have a major impact quickly, so I can try to change management's mindset?
Sure. So I think it's a little bit similar to what I had encountered in my prior life in public accounting, watching and working with some of my clients. I think some of the things that I've seen be successful, one is to really get out there. I think you have to make the push to get on the calendars one-on-one, as opposed to phone calls or emails, but create a plan for yourself to get out and meet with the senior leaders. Definitely the senior leadership of finance, depending on who tax reports to in your current organization. If it's the CFO, you want to be meeting with the CFO at least once a week. It may be difficult, they may be busy, but it really is important that you get the support from the CFO to really push and help get your visibility out there. And one of the best ways to do that is to also come in armed with ideas and opportunities to add value. So nothing speaks louder than results. And so it's really I call it sort of a two-pronged attack or focus. Can you make tax known by creating some quick wins and put some points on the board, like they say, with respect to tax planning opportunities to lower cash tax or P&L tax cost, or other efficiencies, just the operating cost. If tax is a compliance shop, that's okay, but you can be the best at efficiency and innovative and in the forefront of incorporating technology, and then take that out. Don't be afraid to toot your own horn a little bit. Set up meetings to talk about what you're doing in the tax function to be more efficient. with your colleagues in finance and the controllership and business finance. And then also get out to meet the key business leaders. Ask the CFO if you can present or sit in at the next audit committee meeting. And these are all things that you can do if you feel that you have the ability to take the initiative and to try and get out in front of it. That's really the only way to change it. If you wait for the company to change its mindset around tax, it'll be too late, and I think you'll get frustrated. You have to try to get out in front of it on your own with the support of the CFO. You don't want to do anything without his or her support. But generally, I've never seen, and I've worked for 5 CFOs at Tyco alone, and never once did I ever have any issue when I would ask to be included in a meeting or to talk with them or put some time on their calendar, formally or informally. I think they appreciated it, and I certainly valued it, and that's really how I was able to make my presence known within the company and get their help and support and mentoring and the visibility that they in turn then provided to me.
Madeline, since this group consists of a lot of current number 2 people, some number 1, but a lot of current number 2 people, I wanted to just get their thinking along the lines of setting up sub-functional branding already. So if they're the global head of planning, how important it is prior to becoming the chief tax officer that you get that brand built effectively in the organization within the areas you normally touch, but also start laying the groundwork in the other areas you don't normally touch as much. So if you're the global head of planning, obviously you're going to work closely with legal counsel, development, M&A, you're going to work with treasury and so on. But you also want to make sure that the controllers group, accounting, tax accounting, reporting, aware of your existence and so on. And then flip it over the other way. If you're currently running tax ops and the controller's team knows you real well and FP&A knows you real well, maybe you got to spend more time developing relationships and a brand with those other organizations on the other side, whether it's treasury, corporate development, legal, so that you get yourselves positioned. I wanted you just to speak to that for a minute, if you don't mind.
Sure. No, Tony, everything you said is critical. As a number 2, it's imperative that you begin to branch out as soon as possible, just as you said, to really play to what is not your strength, as you said. If you're the head of planning, then by virtue of that role, presumably you already have visibility and interaction with some key constituents like the general counsel's team, the M&A group, and presumably, certainly some others within finance, but also within the business. To a lesser extent, you may not have the same one-on-one interaction on a daily basis with the controllership, in fact, the controller, and certain other individuals within the organization. So it really is important that the head of tax is bringing you into those meetings and allowing you to explain and talk to certain issues outside of or perhaps in conjunction with tax planning. Similarly, if you're in a reporting compliance role, not really doing the planning so much as more of the compliance and the reporting and perhaps some controversy work, then it is most likely that the day-to-day relationships that you're building are within finance itself, and really you're not branched out enough on a regular basis with legal, M&A, and the other areas of the business. So then in turn, it's important that the head of tax is bringing you in closely and early on some of the key areas like an M&A transaction, for example, or that you're getting visibility on a regular basis with the head of tax to the audit committee to report on the tax function, tax risk, or in conjunction with controllership, perhaps on let's say some SOX matters or the controls environment and how it affects tax. So we have to find ways, and it's really incumbent, and I take this very seriously with my team, my direct reports. Again, classic examples where you have lawyers who are primarily the ones focusing on the planning, and CPA, MST types who are focusing on the reporting, and getting them visibility to the right people, and actually, quite honestly, pulling them out of their comfort zones. Because in some cases you get so bogged down day to day that you're not thinking about that next step and what other opportunities you're going to need to create for yourself or help get created. And so bringing them together and in front of the right people. So one of the things that I make sure we do on a regular basis is have meetings. My meetings with my CFO generally are not alone unless there's something, of a nature that he needs to talk to me about one-on-one. But each meeting with the CFO, and certainly with other leadership, when I go around the company and as I've been introducing tax and myself and the team, I'm bringing my team with me. So, our global presidents, line of business leaders, general counsel, and we're very geographically dispersed, which makes it a little bit more difficult than being in a campus setting. And so we're flying around the world meeting all of these leaders, and I want to make sure that I have at least one or two of my direct reports with me at all times, so they get to see, who is tax besides Madeline, and they get a chance to make an impression. And when we have our conversations around succession planning and development, I get good positive feedback from outside of finance in particular, and I give that feedback back to my team so they in turn can develop.
And I want to add to this that this is a personal initiative you should all have. You should look for those gaps and round out with them. There's a story here. I can go back to the first 4 key people that we hired in the Tyco group. There's another gentleman named Joe Gruber who came in over the M&A group. Madeline was leading the international group. And about a year after Joe started, he called me up and he said, I just want to tell you how little I knew before. I didn't understand tax reserves, and Madeline took me to the side under her wing, and God bless her, she's patient. Here I was, an attorney, high flyer, coming out of Steptoe Johnson, Lovells, all the big law firms. But he recognized that someday for him ever to become a chief tax officer, he had to round that out. And luckily, the peer group there was they were not threatened by each other. In fact, they all made each other better. It was a unique combination of culture mix that was built there. But Joe, to this day, who's now the chief tax officer at Pfizer, says it wouldn't have happened had he not had Madeline's support and help, but also just the culture there to learn from each other and to fill in those gaps. So it's both technical, but he also had the relationships. He understood it. And it goes without saying that we're talking about cross-functional branding and relationships, but there's a whole nother branding with the business groups themselves that I know Madeline's, we don't have time to dive into in depth, but a big reason of Madeline's success is that the businesses understood she was, number one, a great business person who happened to have an expertise in tax, as that came about for Joe as well. And there's 10 other people like that out of that group that came together. All right, Mel, you want to move on? Go ahead. Sorry, Madeline.
Oh, no, I was quickly just going to say that I've also had experience where in talking with my direct reports one-on-one, some have been very honest in saying, when we have those same discussions, hey, you're great at planning, but we really want to get you exposure to the tax accounting, tax reporting side if you ever want to be a head of tax. And I've had conversations where some have said to me, thanks so much, Madeline, I appreciate it, but I really don't really like that. And so I'm very happy in planning. So it's not a bad thing either to recognize that even when you're getting exposure or the opportunity is there to make sure that you're having the conversations with the head of tax, with your boss, and say what it is you'd like to do and what you think you need to work on, and also frankly what you're happy with and staying with.
Great point.
There's another couple of sessions on Symposia for that as well that we covered earlier on, Madeline. So that's directly on point. People can go back and listen to that. And the only thing I would add to that is, and we haven't really talked about it, but the whole building of this brand and the cross-functional interaction and then cross-training the people. This also makes recruitment of your tax department a lot easier whenever you go out to market. And it made recruiting for Tyco years later, when there was natural turnover and you guys had positions where we would come in, and we had a lot easier time in years 2, 3, and 4 working for you guys than we had years 1 and 2 when the brand hadn't been established yet. So there's a ripple effect that tends to happen later on as well.
Right.
It was difficult the first 5 years, Madeline. Who's he kidding?
Well, sure.
Later on, it did get easier. He's right. Adam's got it. All right, next slide.
Okay, I think we've probably touched on a good bit of this. This really is the more around the opportunities that you create for your direct reports, so that they can develop their personal brands, as we just discussed. And I really can't stress enough the need to really encourage your team to participate in meetings, to also set goals and incorporate into their development plans and even their KPIs the kinds of things that we just talked about. How many meetings have you had with XYZ leadership team members, whether it's cross-functional, functional leaders, department heads, business, even factory tours for certain groups within tax. I think it's extremely important that tax people are seen. If we joke about it, and I always say, the business sees tax people and they say, well, who let them out? And I say, hey guys, we're here, and believe me, they love it. I mean, they love talking about the business. I've found that you can go to a plant tour, go out on sales runs, go out on installation calls if you're a service provider. There are a number of ways to make yourself known and to get out and at the same time learn. But you're building your brand for succession at that point, by encouraging your team members to do that and to be active in the business, but then to also get feedback from others. So they realize that they're in competition with their peers too, because you want that feedback, and that will promote them and help get their names out there. The last thing you want is to be in a group meeting with the CFO, the yearly evaluation process, and you've put a name out there and everyone goes, who's that? And in the back of your mind, you're thinking that's your future successor, and nobody in the group, including the CFO, knows who that is. That really is a failure on you if you haven't been able to develop those opportunities for exposure and visibility for your team.
Hey, Madeline, I have a question on the succession planning side of the fence, and based on some of the things you talked about. How early on, when you've kind of tapped somebody for succession, you're doing these other things, you're getting them the exposure, but how early do you kind of sit down with them and start talking about this concept of branding, their personal brand, their tax department brand, and kind of bring them into your vision of those things when you're thinking about succession?
Well, I talk about branding from the very beginning, from day one. So in terms of let's say my current role, because I didn't have the let's say the same situation where I inherited a very pristine brand from my predecessor coming into my role at Tyco. Here, this was a rebuilding or creation of a new brand, a brand that I wanted to create with the CFO for tax within the organization, and then also externally for CBRE. And so I have had those discussions from the very beginning. My vision for what the tax department is, who we are, and the caliber of the team was really something we have talked about since the beginning. And so everyone that currently is in our department and who I meet with on a regular basis, the team is around global, so going around and meeting with the team members, it's a constant conversation at all levels. And I meet with my teams below my direct reports and all the way down the chain one-on-one to really encourage them and listen to their feedback also, but also to give them the benefit of, what I would like them to do and how I want them to integrate very early on, because it really has to start at every level all the time, that we're constantly out, fanning out and integrating with the rest of the corporate functions and with the business in order to just simply do our jobs. And then that in itself builds on, on the branding, as we talked about. And then, as far as my direct reports and the key succession discussions, that those conversations happen on a fairly frequent basis, particularly as, we're really evolving and we're trying to determine what ultimately is going to be the right fit and, for whom, and make sure that they're getting that constant visibility. And if I think that they need to do certain things differently to make sure that they're getting the visibility, then we make those changes and we're sort of tweaking it day to day.
Okay. Interesting.
I want to make sure that the symposium members also don't fall into a trap. While we're talking about your personal brand and getting yourself positioned, this concept of succession branding is critical. In fact, I had this occur about 18 months ago. Had a client call me up, and we had been talking about the development of the staff, the number twos, and the person probably most ready to step into the role was the head of tax operations. They had some problems in the past. They were a little gun shy in that area. This person did a really good job cleaning up. I had talked to them about really taking some of their attention and paying it towards their staff underneath. Did they have the right quality people to build on? Have they started to develop these people, get proper exposure to them? I kind of got blown off by the person. They were smarter than the recruiter. You know how that goes. They always are. And then when the chief tax officer reached out to me and said, I think I'm going to retire a little earlier than I thought I was, and we might have to retain you to do the search. And I go, well, wait a minute. We've got, such and such over here at tax ops. We thought he would be grooming. Well, we did, and he's getting there, but he's a little short, so it'd be a stretch. But the real problem is we don't have strength underneath him. So we got a critical area. The CEO is still nervous about tax ops. We don't feel we can take the risk. He hasn't developed anybody there to be in the role. He actually lost out on the job he should have gotten because he didn't do branding for succession purposes. Nobody viewed anybody on his team as a viable next choice. He'd been warned about it. He blew it off. And of course, he was upset, but came around to realize this was his self-created headache at the end of the day. So any of you guys are number twos or you're number ones now, get your number twos to not be threatened by developing talent underneath them and have them ready to go. Because when the opportunity knocks, you got to have that strength there, or they're likely to call me up and go to the outside, and understandably so. So the point I just want to drive home that this is not just about personal branding. It's about branding your team as well, and in sub-teams if you're in, ops or planning.
All right, if there's no questions, I can go on to the next slide.
And I think, Tony, that's a great lead-in actually to this slide, because as we mentioned in the examples early on, how the market views you and views the organization's tax department is going to be a direct correlation to the brand. As Tony mentioned, if the early on in our early days at Tyco, it was difficult. There was a lot of uncertainty. There were a lot of questions in the back of people's mind as to what is really happening with the company, all of the negativity that was still swirling within the press. But then over time, that all changed, but in large part to all of the work that John and Tony had done in building the organization, and for all of us to really work together and support one another. So when we were reaching out again to Tony to staff the companies that we were spinning off first in 2007 and then in 2012, it became much easier because we had grown and developed a brand and I'd say a reputation of being one of the best in class. So I think that external branding is also critical, not only in the recruiting side. Another area, believe it or not, and I put it here as number 2, resolving controversies. We tend to not think about how your reputation and your brand as an organization, as a sub-function within an organization is really thought of or about outside of the company. And perhaps outside of just the tax circles with advisors. But we found that, again, early on, we had very negative relationships. The tax authorities viewed us, with great skepticism, as you can imagine, with what was all in the press. Over time, we built our credibility, and it was a huge intangible for us that the tax authorities knew us and said, when you guys come to us, we know it's for good reason, and we know why you're here, and we're going to be able to work with you because of the credibility that you've built. Same thing with trade and professional organizations and in policy and legislative matters. There's quite a bit that took place during the years at Tyco, and now of course at CBRE, where I'm currently able to leverage the relationships that we built while I was at Tyco, and that when I go to DC or I go overseas to meet with tax authorities or the finance ministry and talk about tax policy and legislation in this crazy world of tax legislation and reform, it's with the credibility that we were able to build, and remembering all of the things that we did as part of Tyco, and that stays with you, and it plays an important role in your career. It's sort of like the internet, what you put out there stays out there, and so it really is something that you have to be mindful of and really nurture and preserve. And continue to build and ensure that you recognize how valuable and an asset it could be.
Hi, Madeline. I have a question here from one of the participants.
Mm-hmm.
Building strong relationships with outside advisors and getting involved in outside tax groups and organizations are 2 ways of being able to build your external brand. But are there any other ways tax leaders can strengthen their external brands?
Well, again, I think those are going to be the 2 primary ways. Don't underestimate how much people talk and how close and a tight-knit group the tax professionals are, or the world is. So the advisors do talk. And they can be, a very, very good sounding board for you, especially if you have good, strong personal relationships with partners and partners, particularly in leadership roles within certainly the Big Four and the other firms. I think the trade and professional organizations are indeed very helpful. I think that depends on how active your participation is with these organizations. I think it's hard to spread yourself too thin, probably not the best use of your time. I think you try to pick the 1 or the 2 that are probably the most critical to supporting your organization's needs, or industry, and leverage that and be an active participant. I would also say working very closely, let's say, with your government affairs team on the external branding is important, because obviously they're in the forefront down in Washington and in front of state legislatures and around the world. And so that is going to play into your brand and how you're perceived when it comes to tax matters. So I think that's another constituency that could be very helpful. The other external sources would be investment bankers. If again you're part of an organization where you're working continuously with strategic initiatives that involve investment advisors, investment bankers, the consulting firms like McKinsey or Bain, they're also very great opportunities to get to know them, and they want to get to know you, and they can also be very helpful in promoting your brand externally.
The other thing I'd add to that too is we see that the people you've worked with in the past, and you've crossed paths with, whether in tax or finance, are sometimes very, very helpful to people's careers. I've had situations where I'm doing a chief tax officer search and I bring up a person, potential candidate, and I'm able to connect the dots that one of the key people at that firm or on the board or audit committee actually crossed paths with this individual somewhere in their career. Maybe they worked at the same companies. You'd be amazed how much of that behind the scenes data is being utilized at the highest levels. These are people they trust, people they hold in high regard, and it can simply be, oh yeah, if you can get her to the table, we hired her in a minute. He loved her. He would love working, with her again. He says phenomenal, blah, blah, blah. Game's over. It's literally a one-call search. And I've had that happen more than once in my career, where if I ask the right questions of the leadership people, the brand of that individual will come back and pay huge dividends. So neutralize everybody you work with. Don't burn bridges. Try to make them a fan of whoever you are and the work you do, recognizing that it is a small world, and not just tax, but all of finance, especially at the bigger Fortune 500 companies. And it will come back. And I've had many people call me up. I'm not on the search, and say, what do you know about this person? They do that. They reach out to other contacts. So think about it. If you're doing chief tax officers, there's probably not a chief tax officer in this country we haven't spoken to, me or Adam or Stephanie or multiple people on our firm. So we do get those calls, as does the advisors, like you said. But think about the people you touch and leave them in a positive light everywhere in your career that you possibly can. It will come back and pay huge dividends. And I believe we have one more question, Mel, correct?
Yes, we do. Mark Lanito asked, are there any books you recommend related to your topic, or that you thought were really helpful in developing as a leader?
Oh, wow. Read a lot of books, but probably the one that always seems to stand out in my mind, it's not new. It's been out for some time, and it's called Why CEOs Fail. And the reason I like it is it's not one of those sort of self-help kind of books around leadership in the sense of, do's and don'ts, but it's not a really long read. It lists, I think it's about 24, 26 so-called derailers. And it goes through the attributes similar to some of the things we talked about as to, what most CEOs possess, and the notion that those same attributes that led individuals to become a CEO can also turn against them and become derailers. So that book made a huge impression on me, and I still play back and remember a number of those attributes and areas that promote, but then also can derail, and try to be cognizant of those every day, because it really resonated with me. So that's one that I would recommend.
Any other questions from the members here?
I don't see any more coming in. We can move on to the next slide.
All right, let's go to the final slide.
Oh, wait, that was the final slide.
Okay, I thought that might have been it. All right, so I'm going to give Madeline just a minute to do a conclusion on her end, and I'll do a wrap-up just for the members, because this is the actual final session of the first Symposia class, and we'll be rolling out the new class, I think, September 25th. We've got 30 invitees that have gleefully accepted. We will also open this up for any of the alumni. We will send announcements that you guys are welcome to participate on the next sessions if there's ones you want to kind of get brushed up on, or you just want to come in and help out on this too. We're going to offer some of you guys. We're going to do a recap meeting with each of you guys individually, talk about what roles you might want to play going forward and what you want to be exposed to. But before we do that, Madeline, why don't you give us a quick conclusion and wrap up for yourself?
Oh, sure. Thanks, Tony. I guess really just to reiterate, branding is not necessarily something we're thinking about, but I think we think about it. Really needs to play into your life every day. Certainly, if you were currently the head of tax, it's really incumbent, I think, on all of us to understand and really ensure that we're the stewards of our brand, the brand of the department and of our people, and that we take that responsibility quite seriously. It's our legacy. And for those of you who are number ones or number twos and you're looking to reach that next level, remember, it's never too late to build your brand. And if you feel that you need to modify or make changes in how you're building your brand, or perhaps how your brand is perceived, it's certainly never too late to do that. I'd take a step back and just really think about what it is that you want from your career, and talk to people who you trust and solicit open and honest feedback and input into how you can further develop and create the brand that you desire and that you think fits within your organization. So I guess my very best to all of you, and good luck. And certainly if I could ever be of assistance to any of you in terms of the things that I've seen in my long career, as Tony alluded to, I am happy to do that.
Well, Madeline, thank you for taking, I know you're swamped as everybody is here, the time to help out. I wish we would have had Symposia there years ago when you were first thinking about moving into a chief tax officer role, which is kind of what motivated me to start to light the fire in the rest of the team here and go, time out. We've heard the same stories. Let's build a program to kind of get the individuals ahead of the curve. So I'm very excited to see how this helps out this group, this class going forward. They are going to be the future of the tax profession, and they should be better prepared than any other group that has ever gone into these roles. And to prepare all of you guys, we are continuing to see more and more potential retirements coming up at the number one level. I'm going to show some data points to you guys in the next 2-3 weeks on demographics. Over 1,900 organizations with sizable tax departments, ages of 60 and older, over 44% are over 60 years old, tax leaders. Over 58% is 55 or older. The group behind them, over 40, I think it's 46% are over 55, the number twos. So we have a changing of the guard going to go on here. We need to just make sure this group is better prepared to step in than anybody else has ever been. There are going to be challenges moving these millennials up faster because there isn't enough Gen Xers to fill the middle gaps. We got some real strategic issues that we need to resolve, but this is one step in helping out. As I said, we're going to have the next class of 30 participants jumping in on September 25th. Adam's going to take the lead on that. Adam Golden on that group there. I'll still be somewhat participating from a Q&A standpoint, but he's going to take the lead on that and get that group going here. So again, I truly appreciate everybody who took the time to meet here on this live. Please, those who didn't, hopefully enjoy the recording on this. The forum will be open for follow-up Q&As. And we'll get those to Madeline for her responses. She's offered to support the group going forward here as well. Thank you for everybody. Thank you, Mel, for putting it together as well. Appreciate everybody's taking the time.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Take care, Madeline. Thanks again.
Bye-bye.
See you, Madeline.
Thank you.
Bye.